Kaliningrad was Putin's most valuable chess piece on the European board. A forward base, a bargaining instrument, a standing threat against the West embedded directly inside NATO territory. For years, the alliance tolerated the arrangement, treating the exclave's peculiar geography as one of those uncomfortable geopolitical realities that functions best when left undisturbed. Then Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, and the calculus shifted permanently. The neighbors who had quietly absorbed the discomfort of hosting a Russian military outpost on their doorstep decided, with deliberate patience, to turn that geographic vulnerability into a strategic weapon. What has unfolded since is one of the most methodical strangulation operations in contemporary European security history, conducted not through military force but through customs controls, insurance classifications, rail gauge standards, and electrical grid frequencies. Kaliningrad is being suffocated. And the most remarkable aspect of it is how legally, how bureaucratically, how quietly it is being done. What follows is a layer-by-layer reconstruction of how three independent supply lines, serving a population of roughly 1 million people and one of Russia's most significant Baltic military installations, have been systematically degraded since 2022. This is not a story about missiles or tank columns. It is a story about how modern strategic pressure actually works when it is applied with patience and institutional precision. Poland moved first, and it moved with the kind of sustained incrementalism that tends to be underestimated until the cumulative effect becomes impossible to ignore. From 2022 onward, Warsaw began applying graduated pressure on the Kaliningrad border. Tightened customs procedures, narrowed visa arrangements, slowed crossing throughput. Each individual measure was defensible in isolation. Taken together, they represented a systematic reduction of the exclave's connectivity to the outside world. The escalation crossed into a qualitatively different category in December 2025. On December 23rd, Poland shut down the last Russian consulate operating on its territory, located in Gdańsk. This was not a routine diplomatic adjustment. That facility had functioned for years as a signals intelligence node, with rooftop antenna arrays tracking NATO vessel movements through the port, monitoring radio traffic, and observing alliance logistics flows through one of the Baltic's most strategically significant harbors. A second installation in Poznan, closed earlier, had served a parallel function, surveilling NATO exercises, armor shipments, and ammunition transit through western Poland. A third in Krakow shared the same fate. Russia no longer maintains any official presence in Poland outside the Warsaw Embassy. The Kaliningrad garrison, which depends on situational awareness of its immediate NATO environment for any coherent defense planning, has been effectively blinded across its entire southern intelligence perimeter. A military installation that cannot see what is moving around it, cannot plan with any confidence. While dismantling Russia's intelligence architecture in Poland, Warsaw was simultaneously constructing its physical barrier. The Eastern Shield program, announced in May 2024 and described by Prime Minister Donald Tusk as the most significant fortification project on Poland's eastern frontier since 1945, shifted into intensive construction phase in January 2026. The program carries a budget of approximately $2.5 billion and envisions 3 defensive lines running along roughly 700 kilometers of border. The engineering specifications are serious. Anti-tank trenches excavated to 4 meters depth, 6 successive rows of concrete dragon's teeth barriers, concealed bunker positions, and automated mine-laying systems. In April 2026, German engineering units arrived in Poland on a 2-year deployment specifically tasked with supporting Eastern Shield construction. Separately, Germany announced the deployment of approximately 5 Bose-0 troops and over 100 Leopard 2A8 tanks to Lithuania, the first permanent stationing of German military forces abroad since the end of the Second World War. NATO's military mass is accumulating both south and north of Kaliningrad simultaneously, and the stated target is to have 38% of the border fortified before the end of 2026. The commercial dimension of this transformation deserves particular attention because it illustrates how thoroughly the pressure has been institutionalized. On January 6, 2026, Poland's Ministry of Interior Affairs closed the Gronowo and Goldap border crossings with Kaliningrad entirely. 8 crossings with Belarus were shut simultaneously under the same justification: hybrid threat activity and irregular migration pressure. The decision took immediate effect. Only 2 crossings on the Kaliningrad perimeter remained nominally operational: Greshotki to Mamanovo and Bezleti to Bagration. Until 2022, these were active commercial corridors where Kaliningrad residents crossed into Poland for weekend shopping in Gdańsk. Polish border authorities now permit a maximum of 5 vehicles per hour. Queue times of 8 to 12 hours are routine. Basic amenities at the crossing points, water, sanitation, food, are absent. The sector has absorbed a heavier blow than individual travelers. Insurance underwriters have reclassified the Kaliningrad transit route as a war zone risk profile, making commercial coverage unavailable through standard channels. Since no trucking operation can function without insurance, even the 2 crossings that remain technically open are functionally closed for commercial transport. The downstream effects are quantifiable. Approximately 17,000 truck drivers have lost their livelihoods. Vehicles are sitting idle in depots. Logistics companies operating on Kaliningrad routes are filing for insolvency. The European city of Gdańsk, 130 kilometers from Kaliningrad by road, has become operationally unreachable for the region's commercial sector. Poland's Kryzy 2026 military exercise, conducted across April and May of this year, added a further dimension to the pressure picture. The exercise involved the president, prime minister, the full cabinet, and the senior military command structure. The scenario being rehearsed was a full-scale conventional war with an eastern neighbor, including the declaration of martial law and the relocation of government functions to hardened command facilities. Polish Defense Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz framed it without ambiguity. This is not only Poland's border. It is the border of the European Union and NATO. Kaliningrad's southern access corridor has been sealed. The key is in Warsaw's hands. The eastern corridor presents a different but equally serious picture. For decades, Kaliningrad's economic and military survival ran through a single rail line, crossing Lithuanian territory connecting the exclave to the Russian mainland. Fuel, construction materials, industrial inputs, food supplies, and military logistics for a garrison and civilian population of roughly 1 million people all move through this corridor. When that line is interrupted, Kaliningrad cannot function. Lithuania began testing its willingness to interrupt it in June 2022, citing EU sanctions to restrict the transit of specific strategic goods categories, including steel and cement. Kaliningrad's governor at the time assessed that the region would lose between 40 and 50% of its transit goods volume. The Kremlin issued furious statements promising serious consequences. Lithuania, operating under Article 5 protection, did not adjust its position. Putin's threat proved hollow, and NATO's planners drew the appropriate conclusion. Kaliningrad's transit dependency was a genuine strategic lever, and Russia lacked the practical capacity to retaliate against a NATO member exercising it. The bluff having been called, the tightening continued. Sanctions categories expanded. Construction materials, electronics, and consumer goods were progressively blocked. The operational impact became visible at the ground level. Concrete operator Igor Pleshkov, whose business depended on cement transit through Lithuanian rail, put it plainly: production had become impossible. Cement trains were being turned back at the Lithuanian border. Kaliningrad's construction sector stopped. Projects were abandoned mid-completion. Raw material access was severed. The decisive escalation arrived through an unexpected mechanism. In November 2025, smuggling balloons carrying contraband tobacco products launched from Belarusian territory caused significant disruption at Vilnius airport, grounding approximately 25 flights and stranding more than 3,000 passengers. Lithuania categorized the incident as a deliberate hybrid attack by the Lukashenko regime and responded by closing its border crossings with Belarus. The closure immediately stranded between 4,500 and 5,000 Lithuanian registered trucks operating in Belarusian territory. Lukashenko responded with coercion, threatening to impound the vehicles and moving them to paid storage facilities. Lithuania declined to reverse its position and instead used the incident as the justification for its next move against Kaliningrad's energy supply chain. On October 31st, Lithuanian Railways LTG announced a 21-day transition period for Russian petroleum product transit to Kaliningrad, citing compliance with US and UK sanctions targeting the Litasco trading entity and Ross. No new transit applications were accepted from that date. On November 21st, the transition period expired. Petroleum product flow through Lithuanian rail to Kaliningrad stopped completely. The scale of what this terminated is worth stating precisely. In 2024, approximately 365,000 tons of petroleum products moved through this corridor, with the overwhelming majority belonging to Litasco. In the first portion of 2025, before the ban, a further 190,000 tons had transited. The current flow is zero. This is not an abstraction. The fuel that moved through this line powered Kaliningrad's civilian bus network, its ambulance services, its backup generators, its heating infrastructure during Baltic winters. It also powered the Baltic fleet's operational capacity and the Iskander ballistic missile systems, whose mobility depends entirely on diesel logistics. Iskander launchers that cannot move are fixed targets. A fixed nuclear-capable missile system loses a significant portion of its deterrent value when its location is known and constant. Lithuania's ruling party leadership has indicated publicly that further restrictions remain under active consideration, including the complete suspension of all remaining rail freight categories. An even more structurally permanent option is on the table: the physical removal of Soviet-era wide-gauge rail track as the Baltic states complete their transition to European standard gauge under the Rail Baltica project, which is scheduled to run modern high-speed rail from Tallinn to Warsaw by 2030. The 2002 Russia-EU-Lithuania Transit Agreement, which governs the existing arrangement, covers only passenger visa provisions. It contains no guarantee of rail gauge standards. If the track conversion proceeds, Russian rolling stock will be physically incapable of reaching Kaliningrad by rail. This is not a contingency. It is a scheduled infrastructure project with confirmed financing and a 2030 completion timeline. The energy dimension completes the picture and may represent the most structurally consequential element of the entire strangulation architecture. For decades, Kaliningrad was integrated into the Brel electrical grid, a shared Soviet-era power network connecting Belarus, Russia, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania to a common frequency. The Baltic states had been planning their exit from Brel for years, and in early 2025 they completed their synchronization with the European ENTSO-E continental grid. Kaliningrad was not included in that transition. It is now, in operational terms, an electrical island, severed from both the Brel network it depended on and the European grid it was never connected to. Russia's preparation for this eventuality involved deploying a floating LNG terminal, the Marshal Vasilevsky, positioned to generate independent electricity supply for the exclave. Independent energy analysts have identified three fundamental vulnerabilities in this arrangement. The first is frequency instability. An isolated grid lacking the buffering capacity of a large interconnected network is highly susceptible to cascading failure from a single generation incident, with the potential for total blackout affecting hospitals, water treatment, and industrial facilities simultaneously. The second is cost. Liquefied natural gas delivered by ship carries a price premium measured in multiples over pipeline supply, and that premium is being absorbed by an industrial base and a consumer population already under significant economic stress. The third is weather dependency. In November 2025, an early Baltic freeze restricted icebreaker access to the point where only 2 LNG shipments could be completed in the relevant period, with each tanker providing approximately 12 days of supply. Putin's emergency energy contingency turned out to be a seasonal lottery. When the three supply line degradations are placed side by side, the strategic geometry is stark. The road corridor has been effectively closed through border crossing shutdowns, insurance market reclassification, and the physical construction of the Eastern Shield Barrier. Approximately 17 Zeros and transport sector workers have lost employment. Crossing delays that previously measured in minutes now measure in days. The rail corridor has had its petroleum product flow terminated entirely, removing roughly 365,000 tons of annual fuel transit. Complete rail suspension and physical track removal remain active policy options. The electrical grid has been severed, replaced by a weather-dependent floating terminal operating at substantially higher cost with documented frequency stability risks. What remains is the sea route, and its limitations are severe. Maritime freight costs run approximately 4 times higher per ton than equivalent road transport. Ferry capacity is structurally insufficient to compensate for the combined volume loss from road and rail. Port infrastructure at Baltic cannot process the throughput that a population and garrison of this scale requires. Ferry wait times at certain periods have extended beyond 8 weeks. With Finland and Sweden's accession to NATO, the Baltic Sea has become an alliance-dominated body of water. The surface vessels supplying Kaliningrad operate under surveillance conditions that would look familiar to anyone who has studied what Ukrainian maritime drones did to the Russian Navy's Black Sea fleet. Winter weather adds a further variable. Ice and storm conditions can close the sea route entirely for extended periods, with no alternative available. Russia retains one instrument that commands attention regardless of the logistical picture. Kaliningrad hosts Iskander-M ballistic missile systems with nuclear warhead capability, placing Warsaw, Berlin, Copenhagen, and Stockholm within strike range. This is the Kremlin's last credible leverage point in the Baltic theater, and Moscow references it with regularity. But nuclear blackmail operates on credibility, and credibility is perishable. During the June 2022 rail crisis, Russia threatened serious consequences. Lithuania did not flinch. The threat expired without action. In April 2026, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Alexander Grashko characterized NATO's Baltic exercises as rehearsals for seizing Kaliningrad and warned of retaliation. No concrete action followed because an army absorbing 35,000 casualties per month in Ukraine while managing a mobilization deficit of approximately 8,000 soldiers monthly cannot credibly open a second front in the Baltic. U.S. European Command General Christopher Donahue stated the NATO assessment directly. Kaliningrad can be neutralized from land within an unprecedented time frame. Behind that statement stands Poland's fortified border, Lithuania's expanded training facility at Suwałki, and NATO's Baltic naval dominance. Each time Russia issues a threat and declines to act on it, the next threat carries less weight than the one before. The domestic tourism anomaly is worth noting because it illustrates the distorted economics of the situation. Russians unable to access international destinations have redirected leisure travel toward Kaliningrad in significant numbers. The region's airport processed record passenger volumes in 2023 and continued growing through 2025. Hotels are occupied, but domestic tourists spend in rubles and generate no foreign currency. The region's international tourism revenue, which stood at approximately $480 million in 2019, had fallen to below $110 million by 2025. Full hotels and empty foreign currency reserves are not a sustainable economic condition. Russia cannot abandon Kaliningrad. The symbolic weight of the territory, which Russia absorbed from defeated Germany at the end of the Second World War, makes any voluntary retrenchment politically indigestible domestically. The geopolitical value of ice-free Baltic Sea access and a forward A2AD node embedded inside NATO territory makes strategic retreat unthinkable from a military planning perspective. Moscow must hold it. But the cost of holding it rises every month, and those resources compete directly with the requirements of a Ukrainian front consuming men and materiel at rates the mobilization system is demonstrably failing to offset. Lithuanian intelligence reporting indicates Russia is forming new naval infantry units in Kaliningrad, even as the Ukrainian front continues to drain the broader force structure. A military establishment attempting to reinforce a besieged exclave while simultaneously sustaining a major land war is not managing from a position of strategic comfort. It is managing 2 fires with a single bucket. In 2022, Kaliningrad had 3 functioning supply lines. The road corridor was open. The rail connection was carrying hundreds of thousands of tons of freight annually. The electrical grid was synchronized to a shared network. All 3 are now degraded or severed. What remains is a maritime route operating at prohibitive cost, under alliance surveillance, weather-dependent, and capacity-constrained. Real strategic power is not measured by the range of your missiles or the volume of your threats. It is measured by what you can sustain. Kaliningrad, by every operational metric available, is approaching the point where the answer to that question becomes uncomfortable for Moscow to state plainly. If this analysis gave you a clearer picture of how strategic pressure actually operates beneath the level of battlefield headlines, share it with someone who thinks this war is only being fought in trenches. And if you want breakdowns that go into the mechanics of how Europe's security architecture is being rebuilt in real time, follow along. There is considerably more to unpack.